Welcome. So let me get set up here. Got you a little slideshow from the beginning. I'm going to go over here and I'm going to share my screen. Share screen. There we go. Now let's talk about farming and climate. So this is neglected. So my handy dandy intro says, farming is very impactful on climate, but it's not talked about. So we're going to talk about farming and climate, 12 slides in hopefully 15 minutes or less. And the goal here is to make a rapid transition from industrial farming to regenerative farming, because there's no reason not to, because we have a lot of control over this situation as consumers, as local organizers. We have more control over food and farming than we do any other major sector, including defense and transportation, even healthcare and media. So we have a lot of control because local action tends to supersede a public policy if we can organize the local action. Everybody eats, so let's go from there. So let's talk about farming and climate. So let's talk about carbon storage. So carbon is, historically, carbon was stored in the soils, but that carbon in the soils has been released because of deforestation and because we're not treating our soils with very much love or kindness. So the living soils become dead soils, and that decomposition and decay emits a lot of carbon into the atmosphere. So we need to so the soils of the earth have a tremendous capacity to store the carbon from the atmosphere. I mean, some multiple, take all the carbon in the atmosphere and put it in the soil. It could be done, but we are not talking about this because there are too many big corporations and powerful interests that don't want us to talk about this, but a lot of carbon could be stored in the ground. Let's go to the next idea. Carbon emissions. Conversely, a lot of the carbon in the atmosphere is from the soils historically, and we are still deforesting and assaulting our soils such that the carbon that remains in the soils is going into the atmosphere. So I'm American, can you tell? North America. In North America, the carbon content of the soils used to be about 6 to 8%. That was stored up from the Ice Age. It was zero after the Ice Age, and then over the course of time, that carbon content in the soils went from 0 or 1 or 2% up to 8%. Now we're back down to 1 or 2%. So we can either year by year store carbon in the soil, or we can release carbon from the soil. We want to make a transition from industrial agriculture to regenerative agriculture, because regenerative agriculture stores carbon in the soil, whereas industrial agriculture causes carbon to be emitted from the soils and from the other things that we kill underneath the soil. Carbon is going to be emitted anytime living things decay. So that includes animals, that includes plants, that includes roots in the ground, that includes fungi, bacteria. Carbon is going to be emitted when we kill the soils, and that is all we do in industrial agriculture. We kill the soils, and we try to fertilize by artificial means. Let's go to the next one. Carbon-rich soils. So there's a lot of repetition here. Carbon-rich soils, and climate. We could be year by year making our soils more carbon-rich. Instead, we're not. let's go to the next one, tillage. So there are two things that cause soil carbon to go down, 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 down. I mean, there's more than two things, but two main things, tillage and nitrogen fertilizers, all kinds of synthetic fertilizer, anything that kill any kind of chemical that kills the soil is going to cause the carbon to be released from the soil. But tillage is physical disturbance that destroys the soil structure and it causes carbon to be released. We don't need to do all this tillage. In fact, it's harmful. If you're a farmer, do you want the value of your farm to go up, 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 up over the course of time? Or do you want to go down, 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 down over the course of time? Of course, you want the value of your farm to go up, 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 up over the course of time. And tillage is going in the wrong direction. We need to practice no-till farming to the extent possible. Not to be perfect about it, not to be pure about it, but no-till farming can be every bit as productive and profitable as the old-fashioned destructive type. Soil carbon sponge is a term that I get from Walter Guinea. And what we're talking about here is that soil is a combination of mineral particles and organic matter and air and water. So the soil carbon sponge, dirt that's not soil, is just mineral particles, like clay. It's just mineral particles mashed together, or mineral particles that's powder because it's sandy. Soil carbon sponge is when you have organic matter in the soil because you have carbon in the soil, because you have living roots and bacteria and fungi that have not been excessively disturbed. And so that over the course of time, it kind of creates a sponge. Now, think of a sponge. A sponge is not clay, and a sponge is not powder that kind of, sifts through your fingers. A sponge is a thing that has integrity. You can pull it apart, but a soil carbon sponge has integrity. And that's what we want our soils to become. We want our soils to become a soil carbon sponge that absorbs water and carbon. Water and carbon flow together into the soil. We want a soil carbon sponge. Next, nitrogen fertilizers. Nitrogen fertilizers got really big after World War II. In World War I and World War II, especially the Germans had this Haber-Bosch process where, plants need nitrogen. So we're going to figure out how to get nitrogen from the air and fix it into a chemical form that plants can use, sort of. But 90% of this stuff flows into the waterways. But nitrogen fertilizers, they kill the soil. They cause soil carbon content to go down. And not least of all, the manufacturing process whereby we get nitrogen fertilizers is it's fossil fuel intensive. It takes about 10 calories of fossil fuels to make about 1 calorie of food. That's a lot of fossil fuels. And, whenever you see like corn, as far as the eye can see, underneath all that is nitrogen fertilizers. It's terrible for the environment from a carbon standpoint, from the standpoint of water quality, from the standpoint of killing the soils. Nitrogen fertilizers are bad news. They need not exist. We need to go from using a lot of them to using hardly any. And that's why we're here talking about this. Food transport. So in industrial agriculture, the food that we get travels about 1,500 miles before it gets to us on average. Some less, some a great deal more. So that a lot of you have to not only fuel the ships, especially you're talking about stuff that comes from South America or Asia. You have to build the ships and then provide the fuel for the ships. If it comes transcontinental from California, then you have to build the trucks, build the roads, and there's just a whole lot of carbon that goes into that that need not be. We could get a majority of our food locally if we chose to do it. And it's just extremely important that you don't hear very much about this from the mainstream climate movement. You hear about a carbon tax, and you hear about solar energy, and we're going to have electric trucks. All that stuff is a drop in the bucket compared to what could be done if we would just change where we get our food. Not all of it, not perfectly, but dramatically. We need a revolution in where we get our food. Let's talk about water and water cycles. Water is a neglected topic in climate. Water controls, get this, 95% of the heat dynamics of the earth. Repeat, water controls 95% of the heat dynamics of the earth. So why are we not talking about this? That's a whole other conversation, but we haven't been talking about this. Every gram of water, so water gets like transpired from trees, for example. And that is a cooling process. When you walk into a forest, it feels cool because the water is evaporating, and that is a process that turns sensible heat into something called latent heat, which you can't feel. Water is extremely consequential in terms of the heat dynamics of the earth, and industrial agriculture is bad for the proper use and conservation of water. Regenerative agriculture is very good for the proper use and conservation of water, mainly because you're not assaulting the forests and you're not assaulting the soils. Industrial agriculture, you're assaulting the forests and the soils. Regenerative agriculture, you're rebuilding the forests and the soils. Hey, I know. How about let's not do that? So let's go on to the next topic. Forests. We talk about forests. So, this is just not talked about. I mean, yeah, they'll give lip service. Everybody knows that forests have some role to play, but industrial agriculture is always deforesting everything. You need room to plant all that genetically modified corn that's drenched with herbicides and powered by nitrogen fertilizers that are in turn powered by fossil fuels. You need to cut down all the forests to do that. So, but regenerative agriculture, you're going to have smaller, biologically diverse farms that include some trees. Maybe they're trees that produce an agricultural product like fruit trees and nut trees. Maybe they're just trees that absorb the water and cause the water to infiltrate into the ground so that you can have water on your farm. Hello. So forests are important not only in how they capture water and cause the water to infiltrate into the ground, they're also important in how forests give off water vapor that becomes rain. Furthermore, forests emit a bacteria called an aerobacter, which causes the rain to fall. Rain, that's a whole other conversation, but raindrops need something has to cause precipitation. Bacteria is one major cause of precipitation, and that bacteria comes from forests. We need that. Yet another reason we need to transfer from industrial agriculture to regenerative agriculture. Biological diversity is so important. I want to burst into song about biological diversity. Biological diversity is so important. Apart from climate, about the sixth mass extinction, the mass extinction of species, we are losing species at a rate faster than anything that has occurred in the last 65 million years. And it's because for so many ways and so many reasons, we're losing biological diversity. Regenerative farms can enhance regenerative farms have the effect, they are wildlife habitat. You've got a diversity of plants that a diversity of plants causes there to be more diversity in the soil and more diversity of animals that are feeding off the plants. And so the cycle continues. We need farms that have biological diversity. When you have farms that have biological diversity, they absorb carbon and they absorb water. We need that for climate, and yet who's talking about this? Perennials, perennial plants. So, industrial agriculture, when you talk about corn, soybeans, wheat, rice, these are all annual crops. We need to get more of our food from perennials. Perennials means like fruit trees, nut trees, also, things like asparagus is a perennial. We need more perennials because we need less soil disturbance, and we also need, we need the ability of perennials to absorb carbon and absorb water and nurture biological diversity. Plant matter. We need ever more plant matter in our landscapes and on our farms. A regenerative farm is going to have more plant matter. What's to not like about this? We have this industrial farming system because it's subsidized. The fossil fuels are subsidized. Crop failure is subsidized. Commodities are subsidized, but it results in, any given time worldwide, 50% of the cropland is bare because the crop has either not been planted yet or it's been harvested. So you have all this bare ground. We need more plant matter because plant matter casts shade, plant matter nurtures healthy soils, plant matter absorbs water and it absorbs carbon. We need that. Almost done. So, recommended resource. Get me out of the way here. Recommended resource, Holistic Management by Alan Savory. Excellent book, fabulous book, tremendous book. I could have also recommended other things, but holistic, if I could fault the climate movement, those of who are sincere, there are a lot of people in the climate movement that are just flat out insincere and disingenuous and in it for the money. I'm not talking about the little people more as much as the big people, but the little people that are sincere, they're not being holistic. They've been taught to focus on CO2 and almost nothing else. It's a huge distraction. We need to take a holistic approach to decision making. And that's what holistic management is about. There's a good dose in this book, maybe a third. A third of it is a decision-making process. Another third of it is ecology and how ecology works. And another third of it is what Alan Savory is most famous for, which is advocating livestock, the holistic management of livestock, which he and I believe that is just critical. It's vital. You're not going to, ecosystems have animals. All ecosystems have animals. Ecosystems are important. Grazing animals, properly managed, are an extremely important part of our ecosystems, especially those that are grasslands and savannas, which is most of the agricultural land in the world. The potentially agricultural land in the world is grasslands or savannas as opposed to forests. Forests are important, but what is it, a forest or a savanna? That's a function of the mix of tree. Anyway, so recommended resource, Holistic Management by Alan Savory. It's a fabulous book. It's available on audio, sadly not on Kindle, but it is available on audio, and I've very much enjoyed it. So this has been Farming and Climate, and we would need to make a rapid transition from industrial farming to regenerative farming because it's important, because it's impactful, because it's far-reaching, and because it's the thing that we have control of more than anything else. Thank you so much for joining me. This is written by me. And if you want to contact me at info@theclimatereport.net. Thank you so much for joining me.